Larry Magid, and this is Doing Tech Right, a podcast from Connect Safely, where we and our guests speak about parenting, tech, and related topics, along with strategies and policies to make tech safer and more civil. And if you like what you hear, please subscribe and visit us at ConnectSafely.org. I'm with Vicki Shotbolt, who is the founder and CEO of the Parental, which is a UK-based organization. I've visited her in her London office not too long ago, and she's worked with global brands, including Microsoft and Vodafone, to make Britain a more family-friendly place. Her passion is in finding practical solutions to complex problems. And Vicki, I have the pleasure of serving with you on a couple of advisory boards, and we've had a number of conversations. And when I was last in the UK and visiting your lovely offices, which I think are they in Islington? Am I getting that right?
You are getting that right. North London girl through and through.
And we were talking about financial scams and financial literacy. Tell me a little bit about the work that your organization is doing in the UK to make sure that British teens and young people aren't scammed and are making good online financial decisions.
I'd love to. The work that we've been doing stems back to work that we did a few years ago now, where we were investigating online gambling. And we looked at a phenomenon known as skin gambling, which is where young people get involved in gambling using the skins that you can buy in gaming environments. And that kind of opened up a world of digital financial complexity for us that we think parents are really not very aware of, and policymakers. And whether companies are or not is a conversation that we could probably have later on in the podcast. But what we found was that young people felt that being scammed was just the cost of going online. They accepted it as part of life online. And that was very much the tip of an iceberg that includes some really murky, problematic financial harms that young people are experiencing in massively increasing numbers.
It's interesting. I've thought about that, how you and I and every adult went through a childhood, of course, and childhood was never perfect. I'm not saying that we want to go back to the way things were, but I don't remember having to worry about being scammed. That's one thing that I didn't think about as I was growing up.
No, and I think we've made a really big category error that is assuming that young people are not financially independent online, that they're not independent financial actors. And the truth is, in the UK, they're spending about £50 million a week. 96% of them say that they've bought something online. The majority of that spending is outside of adult supervision, which means, of course, they are open up to the possibility of being scammed in a way that you, me, anybody who grew up pre-digital just wouldn't have had to deal with.
First thing, the issue of gambling. In the U.S., it is illegal for young people to gamble online or offline. I'm assuming that's true in the UK. So let's start with, why is it happening? How are children able to gamble, given that it's against the law?
That is a fascinating question. And it's also interesting in the context of debates that are going on at the moment about age gating the internet and to what extent we can keep children out of places that we don't want them to be. Because what we see in the UK is that even though we have pretty robust rules, the even bigger hole in the regulation is that online we've seen this new form of gambling emerge, which is skin gambling, which to you and I would look exactly like an online casino or any other form of familiar gambling. The only difference is that they're using tokens or they're using skins from games. They're not using actual hard cash. And of course,
is this legal because they're not using cash? Does that make it legal somehow?
It's more of a loophole. So it is not technically gambling. So we don't regulate it in the same way as other forms of gambling.
But they're wagering something of value in exchange for receiving something of value if they were to win, correct?
100% correct. And the reason that it finds its way through regulation is that the sites that do it tend to be connected but separate. So you'll buy your skins on one site, you'll gamble them on another site, and you'll cash out your skins on a third site. So no individual site is the whole gambling site, but together it's a really toxic combination of sites facilitated with APIs behind the scenes. And it allows kids to gamble in ways that are new.
You mentioned the word scam. Now, gambling, as if anybody's ever been to a casino, it's a game of chance or a game of skill in some kind. You take a risk. There are rules and some degree of transparency, and you might win, you might lose. But I wouldn't call them scams in the way it's typically done in a legal situation. Where does the scam come, in addition to the fact that children are being let in, which they shouldn't be allowed to be there?
Aside from the fact that they are being introduced to gambling behaviours at an early age, and we know that young people that are exposed at an early age are more likely to go on and experience gambling-related harms. Apart from that, the scam element, and of course, when we're talking about scams, we're not just talking about scams within gambling, of course, we're talking about scams in the broadest sense.
Yeah.
But when we're talking about these illegal skin gambling sites, the scam is that you have no way of knowing what the chance is that you're going to win. They are
Mm-hmm.
completely opaque. They're not regulated, so you don't know whether they're fixing the odds. You know nothing about them. Ergo, almost by definition, you're being scammed because
Yeah.
you don't stand a chance. So I agree
Yeah,
with you.
at
I
least
wouldn't.
in Las Vegas, with the exception of slot machines, you pretty much know what the odds are. And with slot machines, you know that they're against you,
Yes,
way against you.
exactly.
But still, they operate within some degree of regulation. And so gambling is one area. And that's obviously an important one. And you gave me some fairly shocking numbers, especially given the relatively small UK population compared to the US. But there are many other scams. And we at Connect Safely have written about sextortion. That's one that we're certainly aware of. Talk to me about some of the other scams that young people fall for. And again, back to that question of how are they able to fund these scams? When my kids were little, they had some access to cash. And at some point during their teenage years, they might have had a debit card, but it was highly controlled by me and I could see exactly what they were doing. And I'd like to think it would have been very difficult for my kids to have significant financial losses back when they were growing up, which in their case was the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, I think the game changer has been that children can now make, spend, and lose money online. They're selling stuff, they're on sites like eBay and all of the others that are proliferated where they can sell stuff. They are influencers themselves generating money. They are really influenced by people who are giving advice on cryptocurrencies. And the digital world is a really commercial one for children, and children want to get on and they want to have their side hustle. Having a side hustle is now something that children aspire to doing. So a significant proportion of young people are making money online, not just spending pocket money or money that has been earned in more traditional means, the sort of means that you and I might have thought about.
It's funny, my daughter is a kindergarten teacher, and there was a student in her elementary school who made more money, I think, in YouTube than she made as a teacher. Now, I want to point out, by the way, that's a very rare situation, but it always amazes me that whether it's a large amount or a small amount, kids are part of the e-commerce world.
Exactly that. You only have to look at a site like Roblox where young people are building worlds that can be monetized. And so it actually, we never want to be doom mongers at Parent Zone. It's not what we do. We're really optimistic about the digital world. And there's a lot to be said for children learning entrepreneurial skills early on in life and having that opportunity to generate some income. It's all good stuff. It only becomes problematic and toxic when it's not regulated, when it's away from adult supervision, when parents don't know about it, and when it's exposing children to forms of harm that we're not really recognizing.
Now,
And
I know you've done some research on financial scams. What are some of the other scams that you're seeing?
here's one that I think most people can probably relate to. I can. I'm in the process of trying to do this myself and failing miserably. 22% of young people in the UK say they've subscribed to a paid for service and not been able to cancel it. And you know, I think those subscriptions are really easy to take out and they're really difficult to cancel. Adults fall for them, but young people are falling for them a lot. When we get into the really nastier stuff, 4% of the children that we talk to had their identity stolen. And that is a proportion that's only going to go up. 13%. And this was a really interesting cohort because this cohort of young people were identified by parents who were already aware that their child had a problem. And what we know about children and young people is that they're very reluctant to talk to their parents about these kind of financial harms. So these are children who the parents had discovered that there was something going wrong. So it's a smaller cohort of a bigger number of children, I would say.
When it comes to ID theft in children, this research that I've done on it, and admittedly this was a few years ago, was sometimes they would steal a child's ID and that they would use it at some point to take out a loan or something like that, and on the theory that the child likely had a very clean credit rating. But you rarely saw immediate financial harms to the child. It usually came later. They would discover it when they applied for a scholarship when they turned around 18. What are you seeing that in terms of a more immediate impact?
It's an interesting question, actually. There are about 9% of young people in our sample that have been offered money in exchange for holding somebody else's money, i.e., money muling. So, exactly what you're describing. And for those young people, there are immediate in real life harms. There are threats to the family if the young person doesn't hand over the money subsequently or won't agree to continue to being a money mule. There have been violence exchanges. It's a really dangerous world for a young person who's found themselves in the middle of money muling, and it's an immediate danger.
So someone contacts the young person and says, we want you to hold on to this money. And they actually give them some money. They transfer
Yeah.
some money into the, I assume it's not a huge amount.
Straightforward money muling. It's relatively common for a young person to be asked to hold money in their bank account in order to clean the money. So this is proper, dirty money that needs to go through a clean bank account in order to come out the other side and no longer be criminal money. So it's proper criminal exploitation.
Doesn't the perpetrator risk that maybe the kid will go off with that money? It seems to me that the kid could scam the perpetrator in these cases.
Yes, but the people that are using children to money mule are not nice people. And these are
Yeah.
the sort of people that turn up at the family home with threats of violence if you do decide that you're going to try and make off with the perpetrator's money. For a child, and sometimes the amounts are really small, they start off with £10 or I don't know what the equivalent of that would be, $20 maybe.
Yeah,
And it
13,
gradually,
$14.
yeah, it's not a lot
Yeah.
of money. It doesn't feel like much of a risk. You say to a
Yeah.
14-year-old, take £20, you get to keep 5, give me the 15 back. It doesn't feel like a risk. It's only when it starts to be an ongoing, okay, you've done it once, so now I need to put $100 through, I need to put $200 through, I need to put $500 through, until the bank realizes that your account has been taken on over and is now being used for money muling. You then instantly go on the fraud database and you're at risk of criminal prosecution as a child. So it's serious stuff.
Yeah. And again, the idea that a child would even have to be thinking about this is just, it's beyond me. Talk about loss of innocence. Any other examples that you might want to bring up in terms of scams? What about the thing that adults deal with all the time, which is being asked to buy things that are substandard or you'll never get them? Things like so
Oh
many
my
things
gosh.
that I deal with as an adult.
So those are the kind of, we've just talked about the sort of really murky, serious criminal end of the exploitation that young people are experiencing. But all the other stuff, buying something and never receiving it. One of the things that we hear about a lot is buying a game that's on pre-release. And then when you download it, it's not fit to play. It's full of bugs and it's rubbish. And what kids do is just go, oh, never mind. That's just the price of being online. So, all of that is normalizing a behavior that is not good, and they're not being protected by proper consumer legislation.
And what about if they're buying it through the app stores? Are the app stores protecting them against these kinds of games if they are being sold through either Google Play or the Apple App Store?
There are better protections. There are, without question, better protections. And I think where children and young people come a little bit unstuck is that they don't like to admit that they've fallen victim to a scam because they see getting their first debit card as a rite of passage. Being able to manage your own money is a real sign of being an adult. So admitting that you've made a mistake or that you've downloaded something that didn't work or bought something that you didn't want, that's a sign that you've messed up and you're not really ready to manage your own money. So they don't come forward, they just put up with it.
When I was a parent of a teen, an older teen, I mentioned earlier, I did get them debit cards, but they were special debit cards designed for children and teens that were managed by the parents. So I got visibility into their spending. And actually, I think, if I'm not sure, I think I even got alerts sometimes if they spent more than a very small amount of money. What's happening in the UK in regard to kids that have these debit cards? Are the parents able to see what's going on?
There are those debit cards, and yes, parents can see what's going on. I think where it all gets a little bit more complicated is where you have Cards are to link to, say, in-phone app payments. So if you're using your phone to buy stuff, that's less visible if you've linked your debit card to that. If you make a purchase, so let's say that you buy some, I'm picking on Roblox, but let's go with it. Let's say you buy some Robux with your card. That's what your parent will see. What they won't see is what you then spent that money on and whether or not it was up to the quality that it should have been, whether you went on to use it to gamble with something. You just see the raw amount. You don't actually know what sits behind the purchase.
So let's do an audio version of your parent guide. I'm not going to ask you to read it out loud, although I'm sure that'd be lovely. But let's talk about some practical tips that you would give to parents, or for that matter, directly to young people, on how we can avoid and or recover from these types of scams.
Our very first and most important tip for both parents and young people is talk about money. Do not be shy about talking about money, because falling for a scam is something that happens to the vast majority of people. You talk to most adults, most adults will say, oh gosh, yeah, I fell for that. I fell for that phishing attack. So talk about money and where things can go wrong. And if you've had a problem, do not be shy and embarrassed about reporting it. The second thing that we would say is know that you should always report it to the platform. Wherever you made the purchase, report it to the platform, because they should be able to help you. They should be able to protect you. So exercise your consumer rights to the nth degree. If you have been the victim of a fraud, report it to law enforcement. And the sooner you report it, the better. If you think you've had your identity stolen, if you think that you've been given some money that is suspicious from somebody that you don't know quite as well as you thought you did, report it to law enforcement. The sooner you do, the more likely it is that it can be sorted out. If you sit on it, like most financial problems, if you sit on it, if you don't open the brown envelope, it's going to get worse.
It's funny you say about talking about money. The two things that parents, I think, are very reluctant to talk about are money and sex. And it turns out that both are pretty important conversations for young people. Let's talk about the role of parents. Clearly, the vast majority of parents on both sides of the pond want their children to grow up with a good sort of economic literacy and want their children to enjoy the benefits of the online world without being exploited. What can parents do first to get better visibility into what potential problems their child might be having that they may be reluctant to speak about, and then to help them overcome some of these issues and avoid them?
I think parents have a really unenviable task at the moment, because it's almost like going back to financial basics. You have to go back as a parent and understand the financial mechanics in all of the spaces that your young person is hanging out on. So if they're a gamer, you need to understand the financial mechanics in gaming. And that is not straightforward, but it's really important that you do it. If they're trading goods, if they're buying on secondhand, if they're on Vinted, if they're in those sort of marketplace apps, you need to understand what they're buying and selling and how they're making money. So you have to give yourself a digital financial education in order to help your young person understand their digital environment. And then you have to stay close to it. You have to stay close. You have to be having these conversations. You have to be setting rules. And I think this is the one thing that parents are really good at, actually. They're really good at saying, here is your spending, your pocket money, as we call it in the UK. I don't know if that's a thing in the States.
Yeah, same term, yeah. Although it's not literally pocket money anymore, but it used to be.
I was going to say, it used to be, but set that amount and then talk about what they've spent it on, and whether or not you see it physically or not doesn't really matter. Having a way to check that your child has spending limits is really important. It was actually one of the best talks when my son was at school. It was one of the best talks we ever got. And it was a drug education talk. And the guy made the very simple point that if you don't know what your child is spending their money on, you also don't know whether they're spending it on something that they shouldn't be spending it on. And it's a top tip.
We talk a lot about modeling behavior, and I can't recall how much visibility my kids had into my financial dealings when they were young, but I believe there was some conversations. Parents themselves have to deal with debt. They have to deal with budgeting. They have to deal with some of these issues. How can a parent model behavior in a way that's appropriate? I'm not talking about scaring your kids because you're having financial difficulties, but I'm talking about having them modeling good behavior that they can emulate.
I think that's a really difficult question because I think modeling good financial behavior is quite hard. You can model the idea of saving up for something. Your child comes to you and says, I really need a bicycle. I think saying to them, okay, so let's set a target for when we might have been able to save up for that. And you can put your birthday money in there and maybe. So I think there are ways that you can still introduce really positive financial behaviors. But I think for a parent, it's tough. It's tough to model good financial behaviors without exposing you're not going to talk to your child about your credit card bill, are you? It would be weird. It would be something a parent wouldn't do.
Yeah, it's funny. When I was a kid, we had something called layaway, which is if you really wanted something, you would go to the store and you'd put down a deposit, and then once it was paid for, they would give it to you. It was the opposite of a credit card, where they would give it to you now and then you pay for it later. And I think that probably was a safer way to go beyond your means because you had to pay for it before you got it, whatever it was.
Yeah. And I do think it's easy to underestimate how important really boring basic stuff is. So I was talking to a young person who talked about going supermarket shopping with her mum, and her mum would say as she was going around the shelves, so, and obviously the little girl would be saying, oh, I want that chocolate biscuit, I want that cereal, and her mum would say, no, we can't afford that. We're going to go for this one because it's better value, or we're going to go for this one because that's within the budget. What's the treat that we're going to choose this week to include in our grocery store shopping? And I think stuff like that, it doesn't feel like very much, but it is actually introducing ideas around value for money, around budgeting, around making smart choices.
I'm going to make a confession about my own financial, not illiteracy, but perhaps foolishness. I started fairly recently using my Apple Watch to make payments because you can click on the watch and a credit card will pay. And I'm finding that I'm not paying attention to the amount. So I'll go to the grocery store, fill up my basket, and Patty will say, how much did you spend? And I'll say, I don't know. I can find out, of course, it's right there, but it's like it's different than the clerk saying, "Okay, you own $27 and you have to peel it out of your wallet or hand the credit card." It literally there is disclosure, but it isn't as obvious as it used to be how much you're actually shelling out for whatever you're buying.
Not at all. And that idea of frictionless, which is great, of course, we all love frictionless. But
Right.
definitely when it comes to spending, there's actually pretty good reasons for introducing more friction. So I used to have my credit card linked to my phone and I used to use Apple Pay to pay for everything. And I've stopped for that exact reason. It was so easy to just click and pay and not think about it.
Right. Even the act of taking the card out of your wallet or your purse, at least is some friction that's causing you a moment to maybe
Exactly.
think about it, that you're spending money.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
with money, we need more friction, not less. And of course, that's not how the digital world works. Everybody wants less.
Maybe I'll delete that payment app from my watch. Maybe at least have taken my phone out. That's a teeny bit of friction. But the watch, it's like literally, it's like it just happens. Any other thoughts or suggestions you might want to add to parents or kids that may be watching or listening?
Kids, I say, if any of this has happened to you, do not be embarrassed. Step forward and get help sooner than
By the way, and
rather
it
than
happens to really smart people. I'll tell you a story very briefly. I have a friend who has a PhD, who is a full professor at one of America's most prestigious universities. We're talking major accomplished person, practically a Nobel Prize winner, not literally, but could have been a Nobel Prize winner. He came to me recently about getting scammed and being told to pay through gift cards and all of these things. And I thought everybody knew that you don't make legitimate payments through gift cards. And again, this is a guy with an incredibly impressive academic career. If he could be scammed, it could happen to anybody.
Absolutely. And that is such an important message for young people to hear. It can happen to anybody. It does happen to anybody. So come forward and get help and it can be sorted out. To parents, keep talking, make it part of the conversation. Don't be scared. I think one of the problems with talking about something like child financial harms is that some of them are really serious. Sextortion is going up at a horrifying rate and it's absolutely appalling consequences on children and young people. But be proactive and hopefully you can avoid your child falling victim to any of this. But it's important to understand it and getting yourself well informed about it is most
Yeah, and I
important
think what you were saying earlier about not being embarrassed, also meaning know that life will go on. Is I always like to make the point to people who are victimized, who are feeling very depressed and conceivably might want to harm themselves. Probably not, but it does happen. To know that life goes on and you will get through it, even if you are victimized, whether it's a big financial loss or anything else, or a reputational loss, you'll get through it. But the better conversation is to have in advance and to prevent it and to be aware of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I couldn't agree with you more on that recovery point, Larry, because for so long we said to people, once something's online, that's it, you've lost control of it and there's no way of recovering. And that's not true. Life will go on. You will be fine. It
Yeah.
can be sorted out,
And,
but you have to come forward and get help.
and one other thought I'd like to run by you, especially when it comes to children, is that the line between skepticism and cynicism. I think we all need to be skeptical. We all need to understand that not everything is what it says it is. But I also don't want to live in a world where you can't trust anybody or anything. This is a big issue now, of course, with media literacy. We're being told to trust nothing.
Yeah.
How can we become skeptical and good critical thinking, but not sink into this level of cynicism where you'll never buy anything online? You'll never use a credit card. You'll never use a debit card. You'll never trust a merchant who is trying to sell you something that maybe is completely legitimate.
I think it's really cynical to just accept that going online means you're going to be scammed. I think that's a really cynical approach to life. I think being skeptical is healthy. That's where we all want to be. We all want to be taking a pause and going, let me just double check. And if that introduces a behavior that makes you double check, it's a really good behavior. But if you've fallen into that kind of, oh, I'm such a cynic now, I just accept that I'm going to be scammed, everything's bad, I'm not going to engage, and if I do engage, I'll probably experience something horrid, that's not a good place for us to have got to.
Yeah, I know people who won't shop online because they're afraid of being scammed. And I shop online all the time. And I'm happy to say so far, I've never been successfully scammed. Certainly been attempts against my scamming, but there are legitimate merchants out there who will treat you fairly.
There are legitimate merchants. And of course, that's another fantastic tip. Make sure that you go to legitimate merchants. And if something is cheaper than it should be, if you don't know where it's coming from, if the reviews look a bit sketchy, then, don't shop. The good thing about the internet is there's so much information. You can usually check whether or not a place is sketchy and a place you're going to be scammed. So, there are things you can do to protect yourself.
Yeah. Vicki Shotbolt from Parental, thank you so much for taking the time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I have really enjoyed talking to you, and maybe we could find something more uplifting to talk about than child financial harms.
I would love that.
Time, Larry.
Doing Tech Right is produced by Christopher Lee. Maureen Cochan is executive producer. Theme music by Will Magid. I'm Larry Magid.